It was 2 a.m. when Jack Miller realized he had officially hit rock bottom. He sat on a freezing park bench in downtown Chicago, wearing the same jacket he'd slept in for a week. His breath hung in the air, each exhale a cloud of regret. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. The coffee cup he used to beg for change was half filled with cold coins that clinked every time the wind hit. Once, Jack had been the man everyone called promising. He ran a marketing firm, had a wife named Lisa, a house with a yard, and a life that looked good from the outside. But when the economy crashed and his biggest client defaulted, his company crumbled in less than 6 months. The investors pulled out, the debts piled up. Lisa left one morning without a note, just a text that said, "I can't do this anymore. I need stability." And that was it. Just like that, 40 years of fighting, learning, and building ended on a park bench. That night, as he shivered under a streetlight, a group of drunk young men walked by. One of them tossed $1 in his cup and said, laughing, "There you go, old man. Maybe you should have worked harder." The others laughed, and Jack didn't say a word. He just looked at that dollar, then up at the skyscraper shining in the distance. One of them used to be his client's office. Now it just stared down at him, like a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. He could have given up. He almost did. But then, a woman named Sarah changed everything. Sarah was a volunteer at a local shelter. Mid-30s, brown hair tied in a ponytail, always wearing a red scarf. She'd seen Jack sitting on that same bench for days, and one night walked over with a cup of hot soup. "You look like someone who's forgotten what warmth feels like," she said. Handing it to him, Jack tried to smile. "I don't deserve it." She sat beside him anyway. "Everyone deserves warmth, Jack. Even people who've messed up." He looked at her, surprised. "How do you know my name?" She smiled. "You used to own Miller & Co.'s, right? I worked for one of your clients back in 2014. You gave a speech once about creativity and failure. It stuck with me." Jack laughed bitterly. "Guess the failure part worked out." Sarah didn't flinch. "Failure doesn't kill you, Jack. Shame does. The second you start believing you are your mistakes, you lose the fight." For the first time in months, someone had looked him in the eye and spoken like he still mattered. That night, Jack followed her to the shelter. She got him food, a place to sleep, and introduced him to a counselor. But what helped most wasn't the bed or the food. It was the people. Every person there had a story. Veterans, addicts, single parents, people who'd lost everything but still found a reason to keep trying. It humbled him. He started cleaning floors and helping in the kitchen just to stay busy. Days turned into weeks, and slowly he began to rebuild something that wasn't money. It was discipline. Every morning, he'd wake up before sunrise, sit by the window, and write in an old notebook he'd found in the lost and found box. At first, it was just a few words. "I'm still here." Then, it became sentences, ideas, reflections, thoughts about life, failure, and what he was learning from hitting rock bottom. He didn't know it yet, but those scribbles would become the foundation of everything that came next. One afternoon, while sorting donated clothes, Jack overheard 2 younger men arguing about their lives. One said, "I'll never make it. Some people just aren't meant to win." And something inside Jack snapped. He walked over and said quietly, "That's a lie. You can win. You're just scared of starting again." They stared at him. "What do you know about winning?" one of them asked. Jack smiled faintly. "Enough to know losing is a better teacher." They asked him to explain, and for the next hour, he talked, not like a preacher, not like a coach, but like someone who'd been broken and learned to think differently. He told them about how pain rewires the brain, how fear disguises itself as logic, and how most people never fail. They just quit too soon. By the end, the two men were silent. One of them said softly, "Man, you should be teaching this stuff." Jack laughed. "I'm homeless. Who's gonna listen to me?" But that night, as he lay in his bunk, he couldn't shake the thought, maybe I could teach again. Maybe I could help someone. So he started small. Every evening after dinner, he'd gather a few people from the shelter and talk about what he'd learned. Not from success, but from collapse. He taught them how to shift their mindset, how to plan again, how to stop identifying with failure. At first, only a few listened, then 10, then 20. Within months, even people from outside the shelter began showing up. Word spread that the homeless guy on 5th Street gave the best talks on resilience anyone had heard. One day, a man in a tailored suit showed up. He didn't say much, just listened quietly at the back. After the talk ended, he walked up to Jack and said, "I run a small business incubator downtown. You ever thought about speaking to entrepreneurs?" Jack hesitated. "They don't need a homeless man telling them how to think." The man smiled. "You'd be surprised who does." That single meeting set off a chain of events Jack never could have imagined. He didn't know it yet, but this was where his comeback truly began. The same man who once slept on a park bench was about to stand on a stage and teach people who'd never known real failure what it truly means to rise. Jack stood backstage, palms sweating, staring at the crowd through the curtain. Rows of clean suits and shiny watches filled the seats. Every man and woman out there looked successful. The kind of people who'd never missed a mortgage payment, never slept on a bench, never been invisible. The man who invited him, Daniel Hayes, owner of a small business incubator in downtown Chicago, handed him a microphone. "You'll do fine," Daniel said. "Just speak from experience." Jack forced a nervous smile. "That's all I have left." When Daniel introduced him, there was polite applause. But when Jack stepped onto the stage, the atmosphere shifted. People looked at him curiously. His second-hand suit, scuffed shoes, and the faint tremor in his hands. They didn't know his story yet. To them, he was just another motivational speaker trying to sell inspiration. He started slowly. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jack Miller. I don't have a degree in psychology or a background in finance. But I do have one thing most people avoid learning the hard way: failure." A few people chuckled softly. Others looked at him with skepticism. Jack continued. 2 years ago, I was sleeping on a park bench a few blocks from here. I used to run a marketing firm, had a house, a wife, and a life I thought was secure. Then I lost it all. Not gradually, overnight. Now the room was quiet. Even the ones scrolling on their phones looked up. "I used to think rock bottom was a place," Jack said. "Turns out it's a decision. You don't hit it when you lose everything. You hit it when you stop believing you can get it back." Someone in the front row leaned forward. Another started taking notes. Jack took a breath and walked closer to the edge of the stage. You see, success doesn't come from confidence. It comes from clarity. The difference between the rich and the broke isn't money. It's mindset. I've met millionaires terrified of losing $1 and homeless men with more courage than CEOs. That line hit. The crowd shifted, intrigued. He told them about Sarah and the shelter, about the people who'd lost everything but still showed up to cook meals for others. "Those people," he said, "taught me more about resilience than any seminar or leadership course ever could." When he finished, there was silence for a second, and then applause. Not the kind people give out of politeness. Real, honest applause. After the talk, a few people came up to shake his hand. But one woman in particular stood out. Mid-40s, elegant but grounded, with kind eyes and confidence that wasn't for show. "You've got something real," she said. "Something these rooms don't see often," Jack smiled. "Thank you. I'm just trying to tell the truth." "I'm Evelyn Carter," she said, handing him a card. "I run leadership training for Fortune 500 companies. If you're interested, I'd like you to speak to one of my executive groups next month." Jack blinked. "You mean, for real? Like paid?" She laughed. "Yes, paid. You deserve to be heard." That night, Jack sat on the bus back to the shelter with that business card in his pocket. He turned it over again and again, like it was something fragile. The last time someone had believed in him, it had been years ago. Sarah, the woman with the red scarf, was the first. And now Evelyn. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed up, writing in his old notebook under the flickering light of the shelter hall. He wrote, Lesson 1. The world will doubt you until it needs you. Lesson 2. You don't rebuild by looking back. You rebuild by thinking different. The next month, he walked into a hotel conference room filled with corporate executives, people making more money in a week than he'd seen in years. Evelyn introduced him. "Our next speaker knows the cost of losing everything, and the strength it takes to think your way back." Jack spoke about what he called mental poverty, how even the wealthy live broke when they depend on validation. "You can have 10 million in the bank," he said, "but if your self-worth depends on the market, you're broke. Real wealth starts up here." He tapped his temple. The crowd was silent. A few people nodded slowly. A few wiped their eyes. When it ended, the room gave him a standing ovation. That one talk turned into another, then another. Evelyn became his mentor, helping him refine his message. Within 6 months, Jack went from speaking at shelters to being booked at business events across the country. But with every new stage, every spotlight, there was a shadow that followed, the ghost of who he'd been. Every night in another hotel, another applause, he'd still hear that voice in the back of his head. "You're still that guy from the park bench." He tried to silence it with work. He started writing a book about mindset and resilience. He called it The Thought Revolution. It was raw, honest, and nothing like the glossy self-help books on shelves. Publishers loved it. Within a year, it became a bestseller. Suddenly, people were calling him the homeless thinker. He went from eating donated soup to flying first class. From sleeping under bridges to mentoring CEOs. From being ignored to being quoted on magazine covers. But fame, like failure, has its own test. One morning, while preparing for a live TV interview in New York, Jack got a message on social media. It was short, just one line. "Funny how life works, huh?" It was from Lisa, the woman who'd left him when he lost everything. The one who said she needed stability. Attached to the message was a photo. Her and her new husband. Dressed sharp, standing in front of a company logo, Jack recognized instantly. Her husband was the CEO of Thorne Industries, a firm that had just hired Jack to coach its executive team next month. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then laughed quietly. Life was about to write another one of its lessons, and this time, the past was about to sit in the front row. The morning Jack walked into Thorne Industries, New York was wrapped in a cold mist, the kind that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. He'd done this walk 100 times before, through glass towers and conference rooms filled with people who measured success in stock options and luxury cars. But this one felt different. He was heading into the company run by the man who replaced him, and the woman who once swore she'd never look back. When the elevator doors opened, he was greeted by a sleek reception area. Marble floors, tall glass walls, and a view of Manhattan that screamed money. A young assistant smiled. "Mr. Miller? Mr. Thorne is expecting you." He followed her through a maze of hallways until they reached a boardroom large enough to fit his old apartment inside it. Inside, a dozen executives sat waiting. Tailored suits, expensive watches, cold eyes that looked at everyone like competition. And there she was. Lisa. Sitting near the end of the table, pen in hand, pretending not to see him, but her fingers trembled slightly, and he caught the flash of recognition in her eyes. The woman who'd once shared his dreams was now married to the man sitting at the head of the table. Richard Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries. "Mr. Miller," Richard said, standing to shake his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet the man everyone's been talking about." Jack smiled politely. "The honor's mine," Richard laughed. "I've read your book twice. My wife recommended it, actually. Said your story was inspiring." Jack's eyes flicked to Lisa for just a second. She wouldn't meet his gaze. "I'm glad she liked it," he said calmly. The meeting began. Jack stood at the front, explaining mindset frameworks, how to replace fear with focus, doubt with clarity. But he wasn't just talking to them. Every word was for her. He saw Lisa shift in her seat as he spoke. She couldn't hide it. The emotion, the guilt, maybe even the pride. When the meeting ended, the room burst into polite applause. Richard shook his hand again. "This was phenomenal. We're lucky to have you on board. I'd love to discuss an extended partnership." Jack smiled. "I'd be happy to." He turned to leave, but Lisa's voice stopped him. "Jack, could we talk for a minute?" Richard smiled obliviously. "You two know each other?" Jack kept his tone neutral. "We were married once." The room went quiet. You could feel the discomfort ripple through the air. Richard blinked, surprised, then laughed it off. "Well, small world," Jack just smiled. "Smaller than you think." Richard left to take a call, and for the first time in years, Jack and Lisa were alone. She looked older, though not in a bad way. Just softer. Life had stripped away that sharpness she once wore like armor. "You look good," she said quietly. "So do you," he replied. "Guess we both found our version of stability." She looked down. "I read your book." "Every word." "Yeah," he said, his voice calm. "I figured." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I never thought you'd make it out of that hole. When I left, I thought I was saving myself." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You did. You saved yourself. You just didn't realize I'd save me too." She swallowed hard. "Richard doesn't know how bad things were. I told him you and I drifted apart before everything happened." "That's convenient," Jack said, his voice quiet but cutting. "I didn't want him to think I left a broken man," she whispered. Jack gave a small smile. "You didn't. You left one being built." She flinched, not because his words were cruel, but because they were true. Before he could say more, Richard walked back in. "Everything okay here?" Jack turned to him, his tone perfectly composed. "Absolutely. We were just catching up. Your wife's always been good at helping people find direction." Lisa's face flushed. Richard smiled proudly, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. "She's been my rock," he said. Couldn't have built all this without her. Jack extended his hand again. Then you're a lucky man. They shook hands. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. That night, Jack returned to his hotel and sat by the window, watching the skyline shimmer in the distance. The meeting had gone exactly how he wanted. Calm, controlled, and poetic. But something in him felt unsettled. He'd imagined this moment for years. Seeing her again. Facing the man she chose over him. Showing them both what he'd become. And yet, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. Because revenge only feels good when you still care about their opinion. And he didn't. Not anymore. A week later, Richard called him again. Jack, I'd love for you to personally coach my leadership team. One-on-one sessions, mindset, motivation, the works. Money's not an issue, Jack agreed. Not because he needed the money. He didn't. But because he knew fate wasn't done teaching lessons yet. Over the next few weeks, Jack visited Thorne Industries regularly. Richard soaked up his advice like gospel, eager to impress. But behind the confident exterior, Jack could see it. Cracks in the armor. Fear. Insecurity. The same things that had once broken him. Lisa watched it happen quietly. Every session, every talk, every subtle shift. And Jack could tell. She finally saw the truth. The man she'd chosen wasn't strong. He was fragile, powered by ego and appearances. And the man she left, the one who'd slept on a park bench, had become the teacher. One evening, as Jack packed up his things after a session, Lisa approached him in the hallway. "Can I ask you something?" She said softly. He looked up. "Sure." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left?" Jack paused, then smiled faintly. "No, because if you hadn't left, I never would have become this man. And if I hadn't fallen, I never would have learned how to rise." She nodded slowly, eyes glossy. "He's not you, Jack." "I know," he said gently. "That's why you married him." She looked away, trying not to cry. Jack walked out of the building into the cold night air. The city lights shimmered like they used to, but they didn't blind him anymore. He'd learned something about revenge that most people never do. It's never about payback. It's about proving to yourself that you can live without it. As he hailed a cab, his phone buzzed. A message from Richard. "You've changed the way I think, Jack." "Thank you." "You've made me a better man," Jack smiled. "You're welcome." He slid his phone into his pocket, looked up at the skyline, and whispered, "Lesson 3. Never underestimate a man who's lost everything, because he's the only one who knows what it really takes to build something that lasts." And this time, it wasn't for her. It was for him. 3 months passed, and Jack Miller had become a fixture at Thorne Industries. His name carried weight, not just in boardrooms but in conversations whispered down hallways. Executives quoted him. Employees shared his lessons. Even Richard Thorne, the man who once would have never taken advice from anyone, began every meeting with a line from The Thought Revolution. Jack had become the voice in everyone's head. But as with all power, it came with a price. The higher you rise, the more people want to pull you back down, and the more you start wondering if you've gone too far. It was a gray Friday morning when everything began to shift. Jack was in Richard's office reviewing the company's leadership retreat schedule. Richard was unusually quiet, staring out the window. "You ever feel," Richard said suddenly, "like no matter how much you achieve, it's never enough?" Jack leaned back. "That depends on what you're trying to fill." Richard turned, eyes hollow. My father built a company from scratch. I built mine to outshine his. But sometimes I wonder if I built it just to prove I wasn't like him. Maybe I'm just chasing ghosts. Jack studied him. The tone, the exhaustion, the subtle cracks forming behind the confident exterior. Success doesn't erase pain, Jack said softly. It hides it. Until one day, it comes knocking again. Richard sighed. You ever feel that? Jack smiled faintly. Every day. That same afternoon, Jack noticed something else. Lisa had stopped wearing her wedding ring. It wasn't obvious, but he saw it. The tan line on her finger, the way she avoided Richard's gaze during meetings. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Some truths announced themselves in silence. Later that evening, as the office cleared out, Lisa appeared at Jack's door. Can we talk? He nodded. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. Richard's different lately, she said quietly. Distant, short-tempered, he drinks more. Sometimes he doesn't come home. Jack folded his arms. Running a company changes people. It consumes them. She shook her head. No, it's not the company. It's you. Jack blinked. Me. You've gotten inside his head, she said, almost accusingly. He listens to everything you say. He compares himself to you constantly. You've become the man he's trying to outthink. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. Lisa, I didn't ask for that. I'm just doing what I was hired to do. She stepped closer. Maybe, but whether you see it or not, you're destroying him. And deep down, I think part of you likes it. The words cut sharper than he expected. He looked at her, steady and calm. If I wanted to destroy him, I could have done it the day I walked in that boardroom. But I didn't. I gave him tools to lead, to think better. What he does with them isn't on me. She didn't respond, just looked at him with that familiar mix of sorrow and guilt, the look of someone realizing they'd chosen wrong twice. Jack, she whispered, I'm sorry for everything. I thought leaving you was the right thing back then. But now I see. You were the one building from something real. He didn't answer. He just stared past her, out the glass wall where the city glowed like fire in the distance. When she finally left, Jack sat alone, the words replaying in his head. You've gotten inside his head. Maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't just teaching Richard how to think. Maybe he was dismantling him from the inside without realizing it. That night, Jack returned to his hotel and pulled out his old notebook, the same one from his homeless days. He flipped through the pages, past scribbles and quotes, until he found a line he'd written years ago. If revenge becomes your purpose, it owns you. He stared at it for a long time. The next morning, everything came crashing down. Jack arrived at the office to find chaos. Assistants rushing, doors slamming, phones ringing off the hook. Evelyn, his old mentor and now one of his business partners, met him in the hallway, her face tense. Richard had a meltdown during a meeting, she said. He accused 2 board members of betrayal. Security had to escort him out. Jack's stomach sank. Where is he now? His office. He's demanding to see you. When Jack entered, the scene was raw. Papers scattered, a half-empty whiskey bottle on the table. Richard pacing like a caged animal. You, he shouted, pointing. You did this. You got into my head, made me question everything. Jack didn't move. Richard, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. Richard slammed his fist on the desk. You think you're smarter than me, don't you? You think because you were some broken man who crawled back from nothing, that makes you better. Jack's voice stayed even. No. It makes me aware of what breaks a man, and what saves him. Richard glared, breathing heavy. You came into my company to humiliate me. Jack took a slow step forward. No, I came here to help you avoid the same mistakes that once destroyed me. But the problem is, you don't want help. You want control. Richard's expression faltered for a second, then hardened again. Get out, Jack hesitated. Richard, I said get out. The room went silent except for his heavy breathing. Jack nodded slowly. All right. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. But here's the truth, Richard. The only person who can destroy you is you. He walked out, leaving Richard trembling behind his desk. Later that evening, Lisa called. Her voice was shaky. He's gone, Jack. He packed his things and left the city. The board's removing him next week. Jack said nothing. You were right, she whispered. Success built on fear doesn't last. He ended the call, sat in silence, and stared out at the city lights again. He should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but instead, all he felt was empty, because in breaking Richard, he'd come dangerously close to breaking himself again. The revenge was complete, but it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like ash. That night, he wrote one last line in his notebook before closing it forever. If you destroy others to feel whole, you'll never stop being broken. He closed his eyes and whispered, Lesson 4, let go. Jack left New York the next morning without telling anyone. No press release, no farewell dinner, no grand announcement. Just silence. He packed a single bag, left his penthouse key on the counter, and walked away from the skyline that once represented everything he thought he wanted. For years, that city had been his battlefield. Every meeting a war, every success another scar. But now, as the train rolled north toward Maine, he realized he wasn't running away. He was just finally walking in a different direction. The world had started calling him the man who teaches millionaires how to think. But Jack had stopped believing in titles. You can't teach people how to think. He'd learned. You can only remind them that they've been asleep. He reached a small coastal town called Camden. Quiet, windy, the kind of place where no one cared who you were, only how you treated the waitress at the diner. He rented a cabin on the edge of town, overlooking the Atlantic, and told himself he'd stay 1 week. He stayed for good. The first few days felt strange. The silence, the lack of deadlines, the absence of validation. No one clapped when he spoke. No one quoted him on social media. There were no boardrooms, no lights, no microphones. Just him and the ocean. He spent his mornings walking along the cliffs, thinking about the people he'd met. Sarah, the shelter worker who first believed in him. Evelyn, his mentor. Richard, the man he'd broken. And Lisa, the woman who started it all without even realizing it. At first, he told himself he'd forgiven them. But forgiveness, he discovered, isn't a single act. It's a muscle you build. One you have to keep exercising until it stops hurting. One afternoon, while grabbing groceries, he bumped into a teenager reading his book at a cafe. The boy looked up, eyes wide. You're him, aren't you? The guy from the Thought Revolution? Jack smiled faintly. Used to be. The boy hesitated. I'm trying to start my own business. Everyone says I'm too young. Your book, it gave me hope. Jack nodded. Then don't stop reading. He walked out before the boy could ask for a picture. That night, sitting on his porch watching the sun melt into the horizon, Jack realized he'd spent half his life trying to make people listen, and the other half learning when to stop talking. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Lisa. Jack, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted to say you were right. About everything. Richard left for Europe to find himself. But truthfully, he was never lost. He was just afraid. I think I was too. I spent years looking for safety when what I really wanted was peace. You were the only person who ever made me feel that, and I was too blind to see it. I hope you found what we both were searching for. Lisa. Jack folded the letter, placed it on the small wooden table beside him, and stared out at the waves. He didn't feel anger or triumph or even sadness, just stillness. The next morning, he went down to the dock and spoke to Henry, a retired fisherman who owned the local boat repair shop. They'd become friends over the past month. Henry was the kind of man who could fix anything except his own loneliness. You ever feel like you've done everything you were meant to do? Jack asked. Henry laughed. Kid, I'm 72. I've done everything and nothing. The trick ain't doing. It's being. Jack thought about that. Being. He'd spent his life chasing, becoming. Maybe it was time to learn how to just be. So he started teaching again. Not in boardrooms, but in a local community hall. His audience wasn't CEOs or investors. It was carpenters, teachers, waitresses, single moms, people who didn't care about status. They cared about survival. He didn't charge a dime. He called it the Reset Sessions. Every Friday evening, a small group gathered in that hall to talk about rebuilding, resilience, and thinking beyond fear. The lessons were simple. The kind that life teaches the hard way. You're not your failures. Pain is proof you're still alive. Success without peace is just another kind of poverty. The sessions grew quietly by word of mouth. Within a year, people from other towns started showing up. Some cried. Some just listened. A few said it saved their lives. One night, after everyone left, Jack sat alone in the empty hall. The moonlight poured through the windows, washing the room in silver. On the chalkboard behind him were 3 words he'd written weeks ago. Think, heal, live. He smiled. That was it. That was the real revolution. He finally understood the last lesson, the one he'd spent his entire life learning. Revenge may give you power. Success may buy you comfort. But peace gives you yourself back. Jack stood, turned off the lights, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The waves crashed softly in the distance, steady and endless. For the first time since that park bench in Chicago, he felt whole. He didn't need applause. He didn't need forgiveness. He didn't even need to be remembered, because the man who once had nothing had finally found everything. And it wasn't in money. It was in peace. 3 years later, the legend of Jack Miller had quietly spread across America, but not in the flashy viral way success usually does. There were no headlines, no TV interviews, no book tours, just whispers, passed from one changed person to another. They called him the Mind Architect. The man who'd gone from homeless at 40 to teaching the world's richest and most broken people how to think again. But Jack didn't live like a legend. He still woke up before sunrise in his small cabin in Maine, made his coffee black, and walked down to the dock to watch the sea breathe. He liked the rhythm of it. Steady, honest, untamed. The world, meanwhile, was louder than ever. Everyone online was preaching self-improvement, hustle, and wealth. But Jack had learned something they hadn't. Peace doesn't shout, it whispers. One morning, a letter arrived at his cabin. It was from Evelyn, his old mentor. "Jack, I've been watching what you've built. Not a brand, but a movement. People everywhere are holding reset sessions. They use your name, your principles, your message. You've started something that's helping thousands, but they want you back in the spotlight." CNN reached out. The Times, too. They all want to hear from you. Maybe it's time you reminded them who started it. With love, Evelyn. Jack folded the letter slowly. He looked out the window at the line of sunlight cutting across the water. He thought about who he used to be. The man chasing recognition, applause, redemption. Then he smiled faintly. He didn't want the spotlight anymore. He didn't need it. That night, during a small reset session, a young woman named Amy shared her story. She was 26, recently divorced, sleeping in her car. She'd found one of Jack's talks online and drove 6 hours to meet him. "I'm tired," she said through tears. "I'm tired of fighting for a life that doesn't feel like mine anymore. I've lost everything that mattered." Jack listened quietly, then said the same words Sarah once said to him years ago. "You haven't lost everything, Amy. You still have time, and that's something most people spend their whole lives wishing for." She looked up, eyes wet. "How did you do it? How did you start again at 40? Jack smiled gently. "I stopped trying to fix the past. I started building peace instead." She nodded slowly, as if something deep inside her finally made sense. After the session ended, Amy walked out lighter, like someone who just remembered who she was. Watching her go, Jack realized something. He'd become what he once needed most. The next morning, he wrote a letter to Evelyn. "Dear Evelyn, thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. But I'm not coming back. The world doesn't need another man with a microphone. It needs people who listen. That's what the reset sessions are about. They're not mine anymore. They belong to everyone who's ever fallen and stood up again. Tell them this for me. I'm not gone. I'm just finally home." Jack, he placed the letter on his desk beside his old notebook, the one from the shelter. Its pages were yellowed, edges torn, but the words inside still burned with life. That evening, he sat by the water, the same way he did every night, watching the horizon fade into gold. He thought about Sarah, Evelyn, Richard, Lisa, every person who'd shaped his journey in ways they'd never know. He whispered a quiet thank you into the wind. Weeks later, the world would wake up to a news story that spread quietly across the internet. Jack Miller, the man once homeless at 40, has passed away peacefully at his cabin home in Maine. He left no will, no company, no fortune, just one handwritten note taped to his desk. The note read, "If you ever lose everything, remember, it's only everything you thought you needed. The real wealth was always inside you. Think freely, love deeply, live simply." His funeral was small. A few locals, a few students, no cameras, no speeches, just the sound of the ocean and the lives he'd changed standing quietly in gratitude. Months later, Evelyn published a final book using Jack's unfinished writings. It was titled The Last Lesson. It opened with his quote, "The most powerful mind isn't the one that conquers the world. It's the one that finally finds peace within it." That book sold millions, but Jack never knew. He never wanted to. Because somewhere beyond those crashing waves, beyond the noise of ambition and regret, A man who'd once had nothing had finally become what he always wanted to be. Free.